Hey streamers and memers, it's Fracken here again. Today's video is about one of the technical topics that I originally started this channel for, mouse acceleration. KovaaK InterAccel acceleration driver is a ridiculously good piece of software, but it's most certainly not something that's trivial for most new users to learn and set up. For this reason, there's a few goals that I have for this particular video. First, point out the most important configuration variables and give you an idea of what they do and how to use them. Next, show you a few simple approaches for collecting variable data for building and testing profiles. And last, I want to help you to use those tools, approaches, and data to build a good starting profile. The rest of this video is going to assume that you've installed the driver already and at least skimmed the documentation and preferably had a bit of time playing around with the interface. Personally, I suggest reading as much documentation as you can get your hands on before doing the process in this video, especially the stuff from KovaaK himself and the current GitHub site for the project. I'm also assuming that you have at least a basic understanding of what your computer's file system is, that you can do things like create and find directories or folders so that you can save and find profiles, and that you have a favorite game that you want to create a profile for. So, let's dive in. This video was a nightmare project for me. If this particular version ever hits YouTube, it will officially be the 4th attempt over the course of as many months. Because I record my dialogue separately from gameplay, editing, and such, projects like this are brutally difficult to get right so that things sync up. For this reason, I ultimately decided to buffer out some parts with random game highlights. For these parts, I'll be putting a text overlay that says entertainment over them, like you see here. There's lots of different ways that you can set up acceleration. To me, an ideal profile is one that feels right everywhere. You should never even notice it. It should feel natural when you flick shots and look around, when you're doing your fine aiming and tracking, and it should transition in a way that's natural enough that I don't notice. Essentially, it should be the right sensitivity at the right time, and it should never feel like I'm having to fight the mouse. Because it's a personal preference, I think one of the best ways to decide the right sensitivity for something is to actually try various settings and see what works best for you. However, there is a problem with this approach when it comes to mouse acceleration. Even at its simplest, you're playing around with 3 variables that are interacting with each other. These variables are your lowest sensitivity, your highest sensitivity, and the rate that they transition between each other. Because of this, it can take a lot of time to settle into a good profile that you'll be able to live with long term, especially if you're blindly fiddling with them all at the same time. Any change in any one variable makes the others feel different too. Again, a good profile is one that you don't even notice. For the most part, you shouldn't even be aware of its presence at all. That's why we're going to build a profile by isolating the sensitivities and transition point between them first, and only then building the profile using that specific data. This way, we're building what we want from the start, instead of just jiggling knobs until something fits. When it comes to the performance of my acceleration profile, I have some basic expectations. Starting at the low sensitivity end of the graph, slow movements should result in a sensitivity that's low enough that I can essentially decide which pixel I want to put the bullet into without having to fight with the mouse, even if I'm full of adrenaline. The sensitivity should also rise slow enough that my tracking isn't compromised, but also quickly enough that my brain remembers the sensitivity that I'm going to get in a flick or a snapshot while I'm playing. It should also rise fast enough that I don't struggle to look around or run out of mouse pad at any time. The maximum sensitivity should also still be low enough that I can hit flick shots accurately. Put more simply, I want to be able to look anywhere I want to look, and I want to be able to hit any shot I want to make. This is a proverbial tall order, to say the least. Having said that, for me, the kind of profile we're going to build here gets me very close to that ideal. I won't be talking about why this is so important in any real detail in this video, but later on I plan on doing videos on aim practice. Specifically, approaches to learning to flick shoot even with acceleration. The profile that we're building here is specifically geared towards making that part easier, because the sensitivity at full acceleration will be identical to what you would get if you have the driver disabled. This will be exceptionally important later on. So much so that this one thing is what allowed me to cut my practice time for muscle memory consolidation by roughly 100 times. From taking literal months to build good muscle memory down to about 24 hours. If I was to do it all over again knowing what I know now, this is how I would do it right from the start. The bottom line is, when we're done, if your graph doesn't level out and peak at an effective mouse velocity of 1, it's going to be more complicated later on. Also, since the muscles don't have memory thing seems to come up so often in these subjects, I'll clarify this now. The term muscle memory refers to memories of a skill in the brain. It's memories about using muscles, not memories in muscles. If you're interested, Wikipedia has a good article on this subject. This term refers to the sort of memory involved in things like learning to play a musical instrument and other highly skilled actions requiring muscle coordination. The approach that we're going to take is to actually let you decide what feels the most natural for various kinds of mouse movements. Most gamers have an idea of what sort of sensitivity feels right for looking around. The process that we're going to use leverages this. We'll fiddle with sensitivity values in the game that we want to make a profile for until our hip fire and sensitivity for looking around feels right. Next, we'll decide on our low sensitivity by alt-tabbing out while the game is still running in the background and gradually making the post-scale X variable smaller and smaller while going back and testing it in the game to make sure that we're comfortable aiming with that new lower aiming sensitivity. And lastly, we'll use a special profile to decide what mouse movement speed we want the accel software to fully transition from our lowest to our highest sensitivity. When we're done, if you move the mouse quickly like a flick shot, it will feel almost exactly the same with the driver turned on or off. The only thing that will be different is that your sensitivity for aiming movements will be lower, so you can do your fine aiming much, much better. There's 4 important variables that we'll use during this process, 3 of which will be used in our final profile. I've put little red dots beside them in this screenshot. The variables are acceleration, sensitivity cap, offset, and post-scale X. We'll only be using 3 of them for our final profile, but we'll be using the offset variable as a testing variable later on. If you have one of the newer builds of the driver, like the example on the right side in this screenshot, just make sure that your accel mode is set on KovaaK Live, or whatever setting it requires to make the graph have a series of straight lines. It should look something like the graphs you see here, but effective mouse velocity should level out at 1. If it looks like a part of a circle or an oval, something is probably just set wrong. We're going to start by creating a blank profile and saving it under that name. So, open the accel interface and enter the values that you see in the screenshot here. If it's the newer version, remember to use the KovaaK Live accel mode. You can scale your graph by clicking the spots shown by the arrows here so that the vertical axis peaks at 2 and the horizontal peaks at 100 like you see me do here. Then hit the Save As button, go to your drive C, create a new folder called Accel Profiles in the root of drive C, and save this profile there as a file called blank.profile. We're going to use this profile now to go into our game and determine our initial sensitivity. With the driver enabled and using our blank profile, go into your favorite game and find a spot where you won't be disturbed. Then, using the in-game mouse settings, we want to set the game mouse sensitivity as low as we can tolerate, yet still be able to look anywhere that we want to look. Myself, I generally set this so that I can get about one full 360-degree turn using about 80 to 90% of my mouse pad. That way, starting from the middle of the mouse pad, I can instantly look anywhere that I want to look, and I still have a bit of margin of mouse pad left over. This sensitivity is what you'll feel later on if you need to look somewhere quickly or if you do a flick shot, so spend a little bit of time considering this. If you're having trouble deciding, you can just adjust the sensitivity so that a full 360 degrees takes the entire mouse pad width minus a few finger widths. If you're having trouble deciding, you can just adjust the sensitivity so that a full 360 degree turn takes the width of the entire mouse pad minus the width of a few fingers. Once you're done, you should be able to look anywhere that you want to look without having to lift the mouse off the mouse pad, but without wasting a bunch of mouse pad either. If you use a really big mouse pad, you can probably just set this somewhere that feels comfortable. Remember though, that the higher the sensitivity, the lower your accuracy. It's always a trade-off between speed and accuracy. Once you've got this dialed in, test it a little bit to make sure that it feels okay for looking around as well as for doing hip-fire aiming. This will now be your in-game mouse setting for that game. Write this number down somewhere. For this next part, we're now going to use the driver interface to decide our sensitivity for smaller movements like aiming. This time, we're going to gradually reduce the post-scale X variable in the driver interface itself until it feels comfortable for you to aim with it. You can start off by Alt-tabbing out to the desktop, going to the accel driver interface, and setting the post-scale X variable to 0.5 in the acceleration interface. This is about half as sensitive overall. Then hit Save Changes, and if prompted, hit OK in the pop-up message box. Then Alt-tab back into the game, and try zooming in with whatever button you have set for aiming on your mouse, and try aiming at some things, and try to do it as accurately as you possibly can. Now, a difference of half isn't a big change, so you'll probably find yourself making this even less sensitive yet. Have a look at the following list of values, and try one that's even smaller from this list. If you pick a value from this list, later on, you can just look up the associated sensitivity cap value that goes with it here. Simply Alt-tab in and out of the game and try smaller and smaller values until you can make even the smallest of mouse movements very, very accurately while zoomed in and aiming. Myself, I use the equivalent of a post-scale X value of about 0.22 and a sensitivity cap of about 4.5, but pick the one that you find it easiest to do very fine movements with. Don't worry if it feels like you can't turn and look around. We've already figured that sensitivity out. During this part, only focus on doing small movements while aiming. Also, I'd advise that wherever you find yourself on this list, go about one number smaller in the list for your post-scale X value than what feels comfortable. This will compensate for the fact that the sensitivity will rise a little bit when you move the mouse with the finished profile enabled. If you find that you need to go beyond these values, you can calculate your own. Simply decide what your post-scale X value is and calculate your sensitivity cap for later by punching the number 1 into your calculator and then divide it by your post-scale X value. Try and calculate some of the values that you see here in the list first to make sure that you've got it right. Once you're done, write down your post-scale X value and the associated sensitivity cap number that goes with it somewhere. They're 2/3 of your finished profile data. You'll need these later. The last variable that we need to decide on is the acceleration value. It's the mouse speed where you'll fully transition from your lowest sensitivity into your maximum sensitivity. When you hit this rate or faster, it will multiply your base sensitivity of your post-scale X value by the sensitivity cap value. This is the speed where you will first hit your maximum sensitivity. Any movement past this speed will also stay at this sensitivity. If you ever want to be able to do crazy flick shots, you need to be able to know how far your aim will move for a given amount of mouse movement. That's what we're ensuring here. There are some compromises to consider here though. Having your acceleration come on more quickly at slower mouse speeds can mean your tracking and fine aiming will be harder, but your flick shots and your target acquisition will be better. Having it come on more slowly will have the opposite effect. Personally, I think a good profile should balance these choices. What we want is a compromise where we get the best benefits with the least drawbacks. In my own experience, and in the experience of others that I've helped over the years, I think a good compromise tends to be transitioning fully into acceleration around the speed that we use when we're quickly looking around in the game using the mouse. For me, this tends to be about half the speed of my fastest flicks. To get started, first we need to create a special testing profile. Keeping all the other values the same as they were in our blank profile, we need to update a few variables for this test profile. Open the interface again and enter the following values: acceleration 9, sensitivity cap 4, offset 1, post scale X 0.25. Then hit Save Changes and click OK in the confirmation box. If you want, you could also save this profile for later testing. I leave this up to you. This special testing profile lets you use the graph as a guide to know how fast a certain mouse speed is, and you can do it entirely by feel. Alt-tab back into your game and play with the mouse for a while to see what I mean. If you move your mouse very slowly, you'll feel low sensitivity, but with the very steep graph that we've made, at a certain speed, the sensitivity will suddenly jump. We're going to use the feel of this sudden jump in sensitivity to let you determine where on the graph a given speed of mouse movement is. We're going to Alt-tab out again, change values, then Alt-tab back into the game and test to see how it feels. What we want to do here is to gradually increase the offset variable, remembering to hit Save Changes each time, until the point where when you look around quickly, you're hitting that fast movement area without struggling to do so, but not triggering it by accident either. Gradually increase this offset variable in whole numbers from 1 to 2 to 3 and so on, each time remembering to hit Save Changes, and then for each increase, go back into the game and play with it. When you're done, you should be able to look around without accidentally triggering it, but you should still be able to trigger it at a speed that you don't struggle with. You could even try aiming and shooting some bad guys to make sure you aren't accidentally hitting this peak while shooting. You should never hit the high speed part while aiming unless it's a flick or a snapshot. If you do, the offset variable value while testing here probably isn't high enough. You want this high enough that it takes a bit of effort to get it to trigger, but low enough that you can do so reliably. Don't worry though, worst case scenario if you get things wrong, you can just go through this process again. If you need to, you can click the plus and minus at the bottom right hand side of the graph to scale in and out to see where it jumps, or click these areas and enter actual numbers if you can't see the part of the graph where it jumps. When you're done, look at your graph. Look where the abrupt jump occurs and write this number down. Specifically, the approximate number at the bottom of the graph where the jump occurs. In this example here, you can see that it peaks at just slightly below a value of 60. I would just round this up to 60. Scale the graph if you need to do so in order to find the number. Write this number down as maximum mouse speed. This is the speed that your new profile's graph should peak at when we're done. We now have enough information to make your initial profile. So load up the blank dot profile that we originally started with. We're now going to put on our new numbers. Enter your post scale X value, then enter the associated sensitivity cap value that went with it. Remember, don't fudge these. Next, we're going to have to just play around a little bit to get the graph to peak at your maximum mouse speed that you just discovered in the last step. You can start by entering an acceleration value of 0.5 and see where the graph peaks. Then, gradually increase or decrease this acceleration variable as needed until you end up with the peak of the graph at the right value. If you need to, you can use the scaling tools at the bottom right-hand side. When you're done, click the Save Changes button at the bottom, and then click Save As at the top, and save this file in the directory that we created at the beginning of this video. Give it a good name that you'll remember later, like new.profile. And that's it. We're done. If you want, go play a bit with this shiny new profile and get a feel for it. Enjoy! If you decide that you need to change something later, here's a few guidelines. If you want to change the lowest sensitivity for when you're doing small aiming movements, you can just make a new post-scale X value and then make the sensitivity cap for it by dividing the number 1 by the new post-scale X value. If you need to make the acceleration come on sooner or later, just adjust the acceleration variable accordingly. If you need to adjust the high-speed sensitivity that you get when doing quick movements, do this using the in-game mouse sensitivity settings, not the variables in the acceleration interface. Long story short, if you change sensitivity cap or post-scale X values, They should be done in pairs so that the values come out to a value of 1 if you multiply them by each other. The reason for this is simple. Complaints that acceleration destroys muscle memory do have some merit, and they aren't entirely baseless. It seems to be much easier to learn muscle memory with the acceleration turned off for your practice, and future AIM videos will rely on this. Those of us who've gone through any sort of serious musical training and have had to build muscle memory for it know the drill. Start slow, start perfect. Only then do you build speed. It's hard to argue with the results for something that's been around for hundreds of years. You simply can't easily start slow and build speed with the acceleration enabled, because it will change your sensitivity when you're moving slow, and the same goes if your default sensitivity with the driver turned off is different from your peak acceleration sensitivity with the driver enabled. This is why if you multiply your post-scale X value by the value of your sensitivity cap, it should come out to a value of 1 or very, very close to it. If it does, all you need to do to build your muscle memory hundreds of times faster and easier is to just simply hit that driver enable checkmark to disable the acceleration driver and just go. If those two variables come out to a different value, you need to do it the hard way like I used to do it. Build yet another custom profile with yet another long drawn-out process. I sincerely hope this video was helpful for you. If you're interested in stacking as many technical things in your favor as possible to win your games, you may also want to check out some of the other videos that I have up, like the one on setting sensitivity between games. If you think you're good now, when your various games are all just kind of close in aim sensitivity, wait till you see what happens when every game becomes aim practice for every other future game that you play. Serious gamers know what their sensitivity values are for a reason. I recommend checking it out. And that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. GG's, and good luck.